Keith, can you speak to?
Yeah, so talking about Exchange Betterment, I don't know how many of you came to the Best Practices Day on Tuesday, but there were over 150 people there who signed in at the registration desk. I think it was 155, plus we had several drop-ins. Just wanted to talk about what, kind of what's gone on. Overall, one part of the project was to update the infrastructure. That has been completed. And not only completed, but tested and verified independently. So now the Exchange service, eServices Exchange service is certified as running on Microsoft's best practices across the board. So that should eliminate any or most of all of the known server problems that potentially were going on, and hopefully most of the unknown issues. But like anything else, it's Microsoft's a vendor, and occasionally things will pop up on that, and they'll get patched as soon as possible. But we're in a much more stable environment on the back end infrastructure. The conference, like I said, there were sessions on email management, calendaring, and also mobile device management and how to manage those with respect to the Exchange service. And overall, the feedback from the participants was very good. They were very interested in learning how to do best practices and how to save themselves a lot of trouble by trying to adopt them as much as it makes sense in their environment. And obviously, it doesn't make sense in every environment to put them in all the way. So obviously, there's some judgment involved in doing that. The best practices website is now live, so if you go to itsvirginia.edu/exchange/best practices, you can see all of the best practices there and educate your users. The more people follow the best practices, the less problems people will have. That's just a fact. If you want to talk about where the problems reside, if you look at Exchange, it's not just server side, there are client side, and then there's actually use problems. When we did the data analysis, we found a significant portion of the reported problems, and these problems, by the way, were reported by LSPs, were actually user error that was causing the problem. I think 8 out of the 45 cases reported were identified as user error. So the more we can educate people about the best way of doing things, the less problems they'll have. PowerPoints from the Tuesday's conference are being posted, and they'll be posted from that link on ITS Web. Any questions? Yes, Ken.
Chris Smedge and I were talking after we attended the conference, and we pretty much agreed that these best practices aren't really what we commonly think of as best practices. They're really cover-ups and workarounds for problems Microsoft has decided to deploy as features that don't work.
Well, actually, that's
incorrect. We've gone through this and we've made sure everything's installed correctly, right? So what we end up with is stuff Microsoft should not have deployed before they got it working right.
So when you're talking about an email environment, you're talking about a client-server environment. There are two pieces to break. There's the client and the server. And in fact, if you read, Zeke was helpful enough to send out some LSP list, some very helpful articles on Network World about where the problems with Exchange reside. And if you look at them, you'll find there are just as many client issues that are breaking the system as there are server issues. So when we're talking about
I've read those articles, but the point is they're saying you can do this stuff. You can take your mobile device and connect it to an Exchange server, and you would expect the mobile device to be able to function properly.
Well, what that article is saying is that
you can't make a change on your mobile device. If you do, you might cause a corruption on the calendar. I mean, this is just sort of dumb. Why don't they say, sorry, we don't take mobile devices?
Well, that would be an option, but do you think that's a realistic option in our environment? I mean,
well, then they need a product that works.
Okay.
And if it won't work under all these variables, then they can't announce that as a feature that is being offered through the Exchange server. I think it's very deceptive.
Okay.
And almost unethical.
So I'm just trying to understand, because essentially when I look at the system, I look at a decoupled system of remote clients that all have their own protocols that they use to connect to the Exchange service. They all use different ISPs to connect to that service. There are all kinds of timing issues that occur because of that. There are client API support issues. For example, on an Android phone, if you're on Android 2.1, you're on Android 2.3, you're on Android 3, they're all different email clients. They are arbitrating those connections very differently. They have known bugs. Apple's iOS had a known bug last summer that was crashing the Exchange server, not just at UVA, but other institutions and other private companies around the world. So the issue really is, this is a complex environment. It's not we have one client and one server and it works. It's we have many clients and one server, and we're trying to make it work the best we can given the parameters of the situation. So our solution is not to tell people you have to do this. If you do these things, you will have less problems. And yes, those things aren't necessarily the easiest way to work with the client-server situation in all cases. Not managing your email remotely when you're on a mobile device, that's a best practice. Not managing your calendar acceptances and declines is a best practice. In order to fix that problem on a technical level, you have to talk to Apple, you have to talk to Android, you have to talk to all the third-party makers of all those devices and say, you guys need to get together in a room and come up with an airtight protocol for this stuff. We don't have any leverage in any way of doing that. So we're just trying to tell people, this is the way with the existing state of the technology, the existing incompatibilities, which by the way are not all on Microsoft's side. They really aren't. If you read the articles, you'll find that blaming Microsoft is disingenuous. It's not true. They're across the spectrum. It's not just problems with Exchange, it's problems with other. So we're just trying to find what's the best happy medium we can provide. We don't want to be going out and telling you, you have to use it this way. We're just saying, these are ways which have been documented, that have been tested, are ways of relieving the pain while we wait for the vendors to get their stuff together and get the system stable. But at the moment, there's not really a good solution for it being stable.
Why can't the big dogs get together and come up with some kind of a consortium of agreement and standards? Every time the industry has grown, they've always had some sort of standard to build on, whether it's how you hook your scanner up or how you do different things within the environment so that the manufacturers and developers all can play out the same standard.
I come from the web world, and there hasn't been standards in the web world since the beginning. Netscape started doing their own things right away. This is just it's unfortunately the world we live in. The more you have